Quality People. I'm Jeff Vieira.
I'm Norm Howe, and this is the Fearless Workplace. Jeff, our guest this week is Judy Ravin, president and founder of Accents International. She is the author of best selling software based learning systems for rapid language acquisition. And she's earned international recognition for helping global organizations create high performance teams where everyone is heard and excels. So, Judy, is everybody above average? Because I want to hear about that later on. But also, in addition to that, Judy has taught at the University of Michigan, at Cornell, and at NATO. Who knew? And so this is uh, this is a fantastic opportunity here. Judy, we've all been in meetings where you could see that as we work in global type settings, it's almost impossible to avoid different cultures coming together and creating misunderstandings because of the culture. That's what I'm familiar with. But what you're saying is that underneath that, even different accents are an even more infrastructural type of uh, contributor to misunderstandings. Well, explain that.
Okay, thank you. Norm, that's a great question. I appreciate your intro. So, as you said, our workplaces are very diverse, they're global or international, and that creates profound opportunities. We have diverse ideas, diverse solutions, just an amazing opportunity to collaborate and innovate in new ways. There are some challenges, and one of them is language. So we have workplaces where English is the common language spoken, but not everyone's first language. We have a lot of people speaking English who grew up in English, and a lot of people speaking English who did not grow up in English. They grew up speaking other languages. Well, every language, including English, has a set of speech patterns, and these are called pronunciation or accent. Speech patterns, pronunciation, accent, it's all the same thing. There are many sounds in English that don't occur in other languages. So when people speak English and they don't have these pronunciation techniques, it's really hard to communicate their expertise. It's and then we have the situation where people are asking, "What? What did you say? Can you repeat that?" It's uncomfortable to ask it and it's terrible to be on the receiving end of that. So, to speak to your question, we look at a mispronunciation as a sound that's literally missing. That's what a mispronunciation is in our world. So, we teach non native English speakers how to pronounce these sounds. That's one area that we provide. Another service is we provide a program called inclusive listening, tuning your ears to accents, and that teaches people how to understand accents that are different than their own. So one side is pronunciation training, the other side is accent comprehension training.
And you are saying that this difference can this is an inhibitor for teams working together.
Oh,
And you're also
absolutely.
saying that it creates fear because people are afraid to even like raise their hand and say, I didn't understand what you said.
Oh, absolutely. It is a um, I'm trying to think now. Jeff told me before we started that I have to watch my language. It shouldn't be too colorful. I explained that I'm a linguist, so all language is equally good. But I would say this difficulty understanding accents, it's really a buzzkill. So it really creates communication disconnects. When people are asked over and over again, what did you say? What did you say? People they only contribute as much as they have to, not everything they have. And when people don't understand, in an effort to be polite and sensitive, they might nod their head as if they understand. and move right along. And there are two problems with that. One is you miss the person's message, and the other is if you don't understand something, there's this human nature tendency to fill in the blank. And
Yeah.
so, right, so we understand what we think we heard, not actually what was intended. hmm And Norm, I actually I know this from being on the other end of the street, having lived and worked in other countries and being maybe fluent but not having the accent down. Oh my gosh, there were only so many times I could hear, "What? Can you repeat that?" without just, going to the back of the line, so to speak.
Judy, that what you're saying there resonates with me so much, especially the fear of kind of getting ridiculed or saying the wrong thing.
Yes.
As a recovering funny talker from the great state of Rhode Island, I can tell you I've lived in dread outside of New England of words that have an R in the
Oh,
middle
yes.
of them,
Yes.
right? I had a boss who was also, he actually came from the same hometown I did, who had a very pronounced, very strong Rhode Island accent. And he was giving a presentation towards everybody in operations in our company.
hmm
And during his presentation, he was trying to make a cultural reference to something that, TV show that we had all seen before. The unfortunate thing for a Rhode Islander is that the show that he chose to reference was one you might recognize. It's called Pawn Stars.
Oh dear. I sure do. That's that's really funny. But
So
not so funny.
do you have any tips for those of us who have been put in that terrifying situation when our ordinary speaking voice consists of what other people feel is mispronunciations, so that they have this tragic misunderstanding when we're referring to a common TV show?
So what I would suggest, that's a really good question, is that if there is a word that if there is a word that you know is a little bit challenging to pronounce, there's a website and it's called dictionary.com. And when you press on it, it gives you not only the meaning of the word, but there's a little icon of a microphone. You click on it and it will give you the example of what the standard, that's not good, that's not bad, it's just most commonly used, the standard pronunciation is. Now, in this case, if you're missing a sound in your repertoire of accents, mhm, um, there are millions of YouTube videos, and all you have to do is type in how do you pronounce, then the spelling, and up come will you will see so many choices of short little video clips on how to pronounce these sounds. hmm If you'd like a full lesson, of course, you're welcome to give me a call or an email. We'll be happy to help.
Excellent. Thank you, Judy.
What
Thank
what
you.
what I hear, what's happened to me is and I don't know if this is related to what you do or not, but in many cases, it's not the accent that confuses people. It's the meaning of the word, and it's not obvious at all. The company that I was working for is a German-based corporation, and we had a big meeting one day with a bunch of technocrats in a room, and we got to the point in the conversation that we thought could not, at least I thought, could not possibly create any misunderstandings. It was a simple thing. Okay, at this point in the process, if the temperature goes above 90 degrees, the alarm will go off. The high temperature alarm will go off.
Oh, I
And
think I might
everybody
guess what's coming.
yeah. And I thought, okay, that's a simple one. Let's move on. And no, they're like, no, 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 Norm, it can't go off. It has to come on when it goes above 90
Exactly.
degrees.
Right. I mean, there are so many of those. You're absolutely right, Norm. And I think, whether it's a business setting or our own personal lives, when something just doesn't seem to make sense, There's nothing wrong with stopping and asking for clarification. Language is made up. There's nothing, it's not like gravity, a law of nature. It's made up. So in some regions of the country or the world, we make it up in one way, and in other areas, we invent it in other ways. So there's nothing wrong with asking for clarification.
Well, Judy,
That reminds me. Oh, I'm sorry.
I
Mhm.
was going to say that is easy enough for you to say,
Exactly.
speaking
I
in
know it.
that lovely Midwestern dialect that you do, which, thanks to Tom Brokaw, we all know is the way Americans ought to speak.
It's
From hours
terrible.
and hours of the nightly news, right? But
It's
for
so
those of
true.
us who have been on the other side, do people sometimes have a bias against people who speak with anything other than that quintessential American Midwestern accent?
I think almost everyone does. And I've even been ridiculed for my Midwestern accent, that sound as an accent. hmm Right. And I think here's where the bias comes from. And Jeff, I'm so glad you mentioned this because I don't believe, from all of the research that I've done around accents and heavily accented speech, and there's a lot of work, research out of the University of Chicago, Department of Linguistics, the Max Planck Institute, across the pond. There's so much research, and our bias comes from this. Way back millennia, when we were just learning language, Cro-Magnon man. So really, we're just developing language. And it was really important, live or die, to know where the lion's den was, for example. So somebody across the mountain comes and speaks, and you're trading. Peoples are trading goods and services, and they kind of learn your language, but you can tell they have a thick accent. So what do you know about that accent? You know that they're not from around here. And so probably they might not know all the really important information, like where the lion's den is, or when the rains will stop. So we have this built-in mechanism to go, wait a minute. I'm not sure I can trust what you're saying. Not trust you, but trust what you're saying. The credibility. We also have that around things that are visually difficult. If we're reading text that's blurry, we're also not quite so sure. So it's the brain's way of saying, danger warning. But as you said, Jeff, we don't need that anymore. So I think the best thing to do about mitigating that accent bias is just to say, okay, I understand where it's from. It doesn't mean anything. Just the awareness of that. I'd love to give you an example. Yes, please. So another thing that can help mitigate accent bias, especially with non-native English speakers, is just to know what people are up against. Why English pronunciation is so doggone difficult. So, for example, Norm and Jeff, can I have a few words with the letter O? I'm going to write them down actually as you're
Sure.
saying them. Some words
Not.
with the not. Excellent. What else?
Boot.
Boot. Perfect. What
Boat.
else? Boat. Awesome. What else?
Gnome.
Gnome.
Mhm.
Good. Gnome. Excellent.
Norm.
At
Or
norm.
or as Jeff would say, norm.
Norm.
Awesome. Good. Perfect, perfect,
See the
perfect.
bias, Judy?
I do. I do. I have a sister, Barb. She's also a linguist. And
Oh,
our
Bob.
friend, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Our friend from Boston, her name to him is Bob. Okay, so we have O like boot and O like book. They're both spelled O-O. Totally different sound. Book and boot. O like not. O like none. That's and ah. Oh, like what else was there? I can't remember. There were such good ones. We have oh, like bought. Now we have awe. It goes on and on and on and on and on. One of the least common pronunciations for the letter O is O, like no or gnome. The most common are like none and like not. So if English weren't your first language and you were learning textbook English, as most people do overseas, wow, that would be confusing and difficult. So once we even just get our head around what people are up against, that can that can lessen accent bias as well.
I am somewhat of an expert on accent bias, actually, Judy, because when I was in college, I wrote a whole paper on how the British response to the American colonial accent
Yes.
contributed to the Revolutionary War. And I must say, I did receive an A minus on it.
Wow. Jeff, do you still have that paper?
I do. I have it actually in the drawer to my left here. It's heavily footnoted. It was groundbreaking work. It led to the academic career that I currently have today, which is none. But it's well respected in my house anyway.
Jeff,
Uh,
if
but
you could send me a copy, I would just love to read that.
Absolutely will. But
Me
the
too.
interesting about it was that in actually doing that research, I learned that the British, as much as we love British accents and we assign to them great authority,
Yes,
great credibility,
absolutely.
um,
Extra IQ points.
they hate most American accents. They find them to be kind of classless,
Right.
kind of basic. But the one accent that they find most appealing, apparently, is that New England accent that nobody else in America can stand.
Really, that's really interesting. That's
So
very
all
interesting.
that said is obviously we have teams that come, these days very diverse, as you said. What I really want to know is there a disparity in speech patterns between managers, often college educated, and the folks, working on many of our teams? Do you see that bias come to play?
By disparity, do you mean a difference, like one is judged more, I don't know, high culture, so to speak, rather and the other not as appreciated?
Yes, the literally often you can look at a team and just by listening to speech patterns, you can
Hmm.
make an educated guess about who the manager of the team is.
Hmm. I
And
think
maybe
that's
it's not so much accent, but maybe it's more vocabulary, word choice. I just want to see if you
vocabulary,
saw any of those.
presentation. Oh, sure. And I actually think it's really unfortunate. It's another kind of bias, even that there's this word high culture versus low culture. I mean, I find that really offensive. But if we look at, people who take, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh my gosh, there is a word for executive presence coaching. So
Whoa.
what is executive presence coaching? And many companies offer it. And a lot of executive presence coaching is around communication, how to speak. Hmm.
And
Which,
executive presence does what for you? Does that somehow get other people to do what you tell them to do?
it puts you on a leadership path. Hmm. Right.
Interesting.
Yep. So, uh, I'll just say I'm of the world where all accents should be treated equally because they're all made up. But to answer your question, yes, that is a thing.
When we talk about misunderstanding, how does what physical problems could contribute to this? Because I mean, there's a lot of people that have got hearing problems, and
Right.
I see them struggling in a lot of cases.
Oh my gosh. In fact, I people who have hearing loss often say that the greater the hearing loss, the smaller their world becomes.
Oh, yeah, I can
Hmm.
believe that.
Right. So generally speaking, not generally speaking, I mean it's really unless there is a speech impediment, like a speech impediment that someone is born with. People all around the world, we pronounce all the sounds of each other's languages. until we're about 15 months old, 12 to 15 months old. So when you hear maybe your kids or grandkids or your neighbor's kids, before that age, they're making all kinds of sounds. They're just, you know, they're making everything from everybody's languages. They're making the sound of Arabic, they're making the clucking sound of East African languages. We do it all. At around 12 months, 15 months, kids learn, oh, this language thing. If I start pronouncing sound words the way that my caregivers, mom and dad and others understand, then I can get my needs met better. So all
Hmm.
those other sounds kind of go on the back burner. And that's how accents are created and speech patterns are created. Now with hearing loss, that's a real problem. Mhm. Yes.
Now, Judy. So, based on what we've covered, and with some good humor here to this point, your accent can kind of lead people to believe and may have preconceived notions about your background,
Yes.
your intelligence,
Yes.
your education,
Your
where you're
work ethic.
from, your work
Exactly.
ethic. What else do do people kind of attribute, uh, kind of falsely, to the simple inflections of and patterns of your speech?
Oh my goodness gracious. Um, what else? Your level of seriousness. For example, if you talk, do either of you have or had teenagers?
Yes, yes, I do.
Uh-huh,
I
right.
used to have hair.
Oh, so, oh yes, we can blame teenagers on that as well. Um, so level of seriousness, how engaged a person is. Um, so for example, if someone is passionate about their topic, in our culture, that means we want to hear a lot of emphasis on words. We want to hear a lot of up and down intonation. That's called emphatic speech, speaking with emphasis and passion. Hmm. But in
Is
these
there?
other cultures, it doesn't mean that at all.
Yeah, I was going to ask too. Is there a generational component to this? Because I've heard people refer, for example, to millennials in the workplace, saying that vocal fry, ending a
Yes,
statement as though it was a question, kind
yes,
of contributes to that age gap on teams in the workplace.
absolutely. Absolutely. If you listen to a TED talk, for example, you'll almost never hear, and people are coached on how to present. That's why they all sort of sound the same in terms of presentation, um, modulating their voice, intonation. I mean, I love that kind of, so, but whatever, it's a certain way that's very engaging. It really engages your listener. What we won't hear is someone who finished their sentences like this with a rising note. Hmm. So, this is what you should do. Right. And the problem in the workforce, there's been a lot of research around that as well, is that it really hurts women's credibility. Because in English, the only time that we have a question that ends with rising intonation is when we're asking yes or no. Everything else, it goes down. Where are you from? What did you have for dinner? Did you have dinner? That's different. That's yes or no. So with this rising intonation, there, it's almost as if women are asking for permission. It can be perceived like that. So yes, that's a real thing, Jeff.
And is that something that should women be coached to change, or should other people be coached to just say, well, you know what, that's the way they talk. That doesn't mean that they're being tentative.
Oh, that's such a good question, Norm. That's excellent. And I think there's an opportunity for both sides. So a lot of organizations they'll bring people like myself and others to come in and do communication um, workshops, webinars, so that we can learn these things. We can build a compassionate ear, and we can also give women the choice. Feel free to use that intonation if you'd like to. However, it might not be as effective. So, accent and pronunciation is all about what's effective. It's not good, it's not bad. It's just what, how can we get our message across so that it's easily understood?
Judy, I have to know. Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos has been in the news. She is well known for a vocal affect that she uses, where she brings her voice down several registers in her conversation. Apparently, in an effort to be more credible as a big tech
Exactly.
leader, what have you. What do you think of that?
Well, I think if it's intentional, and it sounds like it is intentional, the idea is in Western culture, the deeper the voice, the lower the pitch, the more authority a person is given. That is a bias, and it's very real, for better or for worse. So, exactly that. She's trying to build her authority, credibility, hmm
And
and
so,
make a case.
those of us who are very far removed from the millennial generation will remember that movie Patton with George C. Scott.
Yes,
And Patton's voice, from what I read, was actually a very high pitched voice in
yes,
reality. But
yes,
George C. Scott chose to take that voice way down, to your
yes,
point, because it felt unnatural to have someone with so high pitched a voice be able to speak authoritatively.
exactly. Have you ever had the experience where maybe you've been on a conference call with someone and then the camera goes on and they look so different than what you imagined? hmm That's
That
all about
great example.
it's all about accent bias. And I think that we the question is not to have accent bias. The question is to recognize it. And when it happens, take a right turn. hmm
What should organizations do to how would they recognize that these kinds of biases are inhibiting the organization? How would I even know that I have a problem?
Well, that's a really good question. So some organizations, they put out surveys that say things like, what would make your team, what would empower your team? What would create greater collaboration? What would create more effective productivity? And oftentimes, what they'll get back are things like, we can't understand one another, or things like that. That's a nice way of saying it. We can't, that's at least we, one another, but things to that degree. And then I think, Norm, the biggest challenge that we've had, we've been doing, my company, we have our faculty, we've been doing this for 25 years. And the industry as a whole is still a nascent, budding industry. People don't know that these solutions exist, that there is coaching around accent comprehension, tuning our ears to accents. There is coaching around pronunciation training, learning how to pronounce these sounds to become more effective. So, what you, Norm, and Jeff are doing is so important. It spreads the word so that people, they know, oh, great, there are these solutions, and then they can choose to explore them. So,
My
big
my
thank you to
daughter
the two of you.
my daughter is a she's a conference interpreter. So
Oh,
she, yeah, what she told me an extraordinary statistic the other day that Spanish speakers speak at a syllable per minute rate of double English speakers,
yes,
and, just astounding to me.
it's
And
astounding.
I wouldn't even want to guess what Indian
Oh
is
my gosh, you
like.
read my mind. Hindi speakers and other languages from India. Wow.
and
We
and
are
the
slow. Norm, we are such slow speakers.
well, but she said that there's an important thing. Also, English is a very compact language, and she said the rate of idea transmission is virtually the same across every language that she's familiar with. So you write something in Spanish, it's going to be a lot longer than if you write something in English because they have a lot more syllables. But the thing is, when I hear these people speak and they're speaking in English, I my sense, and I wonder what you think of this, is that they're speaking at the same syllable rate that they were when they were speaking Spanish or Hindi or something like that. And it's like a machine gun coming at you.
Yes, yes. And so, it's very hard in that respect to train ourselves to understand faster. That one is a hard one to do. It's much easier to ask people to speak slower for you, for us. And here's a nice way to do it. Instead of, can you please slow down? Or will you slow down, please? It's easier to say, it's easier to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. I would understand better if you could speak a little slower for me. I don't understand
Oh,
for me. And
oh,
that
that's
means
good.
we both have a problem rather than you have a problem. I'd
Yeah.
like to understand. You can even say, I know that English is a slow language. We're slow. It's true. English is a slow language. Could you please speak a little slower for me? And the other thing that I like to suggest, and this is to our clients, our students who don't speak English as a first language, when you think you're speaking too slow, you've probably got it just right. So you can tell people that too. If you feel like you're too slow, it's probably just right for me.
And what can we do, Judy? So if we're on the other side of uh, that communication, uh, how can we change the way that we speak in order to make people that are at all levels of English comprehension, when we're speaking in English, follow along with what we're trying to communicate? Is there anything that we can do on that score?
There are, oh my gosh, Jeff, Norm, you guys are asking like the best questions. You're asking the best questions. So there are a few things. Here's number one. We can refrain from using idioms. And idioms are words that don't translate word to word from one language to another. I've used many of them already. I've used doggone, that was one. Oh my gosh, we use them 24/7. There's an idiom. In and out, there's an idiom. They're all over the place. There's an idiom. Mhm. So we can start building an awareness of every time we're not using direct speech. That's an example of indirect speech. That's one
So
thing.
you
The
mean
other thing that
repeating it louder the next time is not a good thing.
not always, it doesn't always do the job. Right. There's do the job. There's another one. Yeah, Norm, I think you're onto something there. Not louder. hmm Sometimes slower, but not louder. Great. The other thing that we can do is we can start minimizing the haftas. And the hafta are things like have to means have to, let me, gimme, give me, can't ya, can't you. Because when people are learning English, those just aren't found in a grammar book. They don't exist. So speaking again a little bit more enunciating word from word. And here's another one that I think is so awful and it's so difficult with grammar. Norm, let's say you didn't know Jeff. You don't know Jeff. So I'm going to ask you a question. You don't know Jeff, okay? Norm, you don't know Jeff, do you?
No.
No. So I stated in the negative, you don't know Norm. I asked in the positive, do you? And to agree, you said no. You said no in order to agree. That is crazy making. That's just, it's accurate grammar, but it's bad grammar in terms of it's difficult. Those are called tag questions. And we can avoid tag questions. Here's an idiom like the plague. Just if we avoid tag questions, that makes it easier on our listener.
Excellent, Judy. Is there uh, is there anything else you would recommend that people who are concerned about this, who maybe have teams that are very diverse in terms of their accent, who want to learn more, what would you recommend to that person to do that would help increase their knowledge and help them make as positive and welcoming an environment as possible for people that have all different ways of speaking?
Well, there's training and coaching around this. Our organization provides this. There are other organizations that provide this. Will you be giving my contact information? You're welcome to share my contact information with the audience so they can get in contact with me and I can give some resources. One thing to look up online is accent reduction classes or accent comprehension, but the training is available and it's not that costly. It's a big impact for providing this kind of communication. Some people have really felt that providing this kind of training, understanding people's accents, learning English pronunciation, it really levels the playing field. If we all have to speak in English, we're really at a disadvantage if people in our team aren't able to, don't have the resources, the tools. Yeah.
I mean, English is spoken by, I don't know, the second language is, it's got to be the biggest second language out there, maybe Chinese. But I mean, there's all kinds of people that are out there speaking English that uh, it's a, they didn't learn it initially, that's for sure.
Exactly. It is the global language of commerce. It's the global language of medicine. It's the global language of just about everything. Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
airline pilots, when they talk about height, for instance, not only are they speaking in English, but they talk about height in terms of thousands of feet. I mean, that's
Exactly.
just crazy.
Exactly. Right. So um, there are requirements to fly internationally. And so pilots have to be proficient to a very high degree, actually, in English pronunciation, accent, as well as being able to configure between feet and meters, all of that good stuff. And there is a requirement for English proficiency around that.
What a great point, Judy. As you're flying on a long haul flight, you're going to pass sometimes, especially flying internationally, through different control zones where you're going to have to interact with the person over the radio. So it's not video, it's not text. It's
Absolutely.
so they you have to be able to understand each other. One other thing that people may not realize about their airline pilots, they actually learn to talk and emulate Chuck Yeager
I
when
didn't
they
know that.
yeah
Really?
when they're yeah. So if you remember Chuck Yeager for the from the Right Stuff, that movie, that book, or whatever, he had a very pronounced way of speaking, and he was very cool no matter what happened. So he was famous for kind of walking away from wrecked aircraft and being absolutely calm, and he talked in that drawl. And so
That's
when
so
you have an
interesting.
emergency on an aircraft, your pilot is trained to kind of keep the emotion out of their voice, so that they wind up sounding a lot like Chuck Yeager. So when I knew somebody who was on the plane that crashed in the Hudson, and she said that Sully basically came on once after they were taken off and just said, uh, brace for impact. But the way he said brace for impact, and I think he said, we're going into the Hudson or something. But the way he said brace for impact was so flat, just a matter of fact, not
Cool.
the way I would say it would be screaming brace for impact. But it's
Oh,
done
me
in a way
too.
that reassures the passengers and kind of cuts through and communicates very clearly. So there's a lot to the way that we communicate verbally, especially in situations where we know there's going to be international implications of it, and
Absolutely.
perhaps even safety implications.
That's a great example. Great question, Norm, and great example, Jess. And You guys tag team this wonderfully.
Thank you. Is there anything you would recommend? A lot of our audience is quality professionals. Anything in particular about this topic that you'd want to call out for quality professionals?
I would say that if there's any hesitation that collaboration, productivity, advancement, employee advancement, what else? Efficacy, client satisfaction. If this is being impacted by heavily accented speech, there are solutions, and they're not widely known, but they are have such tremendous impact. Our organization alone have had thousands, thousands of professionals go through both programs, the inclusive listening and the powerful pronunciation. Companies, and we'll get a phone call 6 months later, I finally made partner, or this, that, and the other. hmm Our physicians, their patient survey scores have gone up. All kinds of things. Communication matters. And if we can give the people on our teams the tools they need, everybody excels.
Judy, thank you for joining us. But let me ask you one final question. Let's get
Please.
down to the brass tacks here. What is really the best accent in the world?
The best accent in the world is the one that you speak, and you meaning everyone. You
Excellent.
plural. That's the best accent in the world.
And if you want to hear groundbreaking topics like Judy's shared with us today in the accent that everybody speaks, please stay with us on the Fearless Workplace. New episodes drop every other Monday. And if you want to discuss topics like these and you're a quality professional, please join the American Society for Quality and consider joining the Team and Workplace Excellence Forum. We get to talk about fun stuff like this day in and day out with wonderful people with very nice accents, such as Judy. Judy, thank you so much for your
Oh,
time today.
thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor.